Welcome to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast, episode 111.
Welcome to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast with your host, Jack Mountain Bushcraft School founder and Master Main Guide, Tim Smith.
I'm your host, Tim Smith. I'm a registered Master Main Guide and have been a full-time outdoor instructor and guide since founding the Jack Mountain Bushcraft School in 1999. We help people become more skilled, more knowledgeable, more experienced, and more confident in the natural world through our bushcraft and guide training semester programs and multi-week canoe and snowshoe expeditions. You can check out the show notes to all of our podcasts at blog.jackmtn.com. If you're interested in learning more about our college-accredited and GI Bill-approved programs, visit the Jack Mountain Bushcraft School on the web at jackmtn.com. And check out our online network and digital learning academy at bushcraftschool.com. Hello and welcome back to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Smith, and we haven't done this for a while. I think the last one we recorded was the end of the fall semester with Matthew Road. And current events. We ended up canceling all of our winter programs this year again, second year in a row, because of COVID. Ultimately, while camp life is ideal for social distancing for 3 seasons because you're camped in your own tent, we're outside all the time. It's not as if we're in some place with bad ventilation. In the winter time, cramming people from all over the U.S. and Canada into small tents that are unventilated, small cabins, small wall tents, is sort of the antithesis to social distancing. So in order to be safe, we decided to cancel for this year. And I dragged my feet on that and waited till the last minute, hoping that the Omicron bit was going to be past us, but no such luck. So ended up pulling the pin on it and saying, not this year. In other news, the dates are on the calendar for next winter, and hopefully we're going to be able to have a very robust winter calendar for the first year in a few, because hopefully by then we'll be out from under the thumb of the pandemic. So we're going to have the Winter Woodsman, we're going to have the Boreal Snowshoe Expedition, and we're actually planning a big winter expedition, multi-week, something real hard, as a full tang expedition. So really looking forward to that. On today's episode of the podcast, it is part 1 of a 2-part series where I speak with our old friend and instructor Paul Sveum, and we discuss 10 things that he wished he knew when getting started with fly fishing. So what do you do in the middle of winter? You plan out your summer garden and you plan out all the fishing trips that you want to take on those kind of icy, snowy, super cold nights. So without any further ado, let's get to it. So welcome back to the podcast, Paul Sveum. How are you doing today?
Hey, Tim, man, I'm doing great. It's the only thing that's not great is that we are thousands of miles apart, and that that doesn't sit well with me. That doesn't feel right.
But absence makes the heart grow fonder, right?
I mean,
Maybe.
I would love to say yes right now. I'm just going to say yes, and then we'll move on. But it's hard. It's hard being this far away from.
It is. It's a challenge. So it's the middle of winter. And what do you do in the middle of winter? You sit around and you think about what you're going to do in the springtime. And that, in my mind, I'm often like planning, hey, what am I going to grow in the garden? What seeds am I going to get? Where am I going to fish this year? Like what, every year in the winter, I'm like, this is the year that I'm going to fish every weekend and, throw a few casts down and really get into it. So let's talk about fishing. So I can't remember if you had the master guide license the last time we talked fishing on the podcast, but Paul is a registered master main guide and has been running our fly fishing school at the Jack Mountain Bushcraft School now, the director of the fly fishing school. So last year, in the middle of the pandemic, bucking the system, you ran a couple of super well-received fly fishing programs, right? So there's an intro weekend, and then there's some advanced fishing on the river. So tell us, give us the 30-second overview on how those went.
Yeah, sure. So I think I was master certified this time last year, but the pandemic's starting to get into the blurries for me.
Yeah.
No, we ran 2 classes last year as part of our fly fishing programming at Jack Mountain, and both were just personally for me tremendously fun. I'm kind of coming out of the dark ages of having a little toddler around the house, so it's fun to be able to get back out and get guiding again and get back up to Jack Mountain, where I spent so much time. And so we had a blast. We ran our inaugural Intro to Fly Fishing weekend last Memorial Day, and that was just so much fun for me to get out and share love of this sport and love of the outdoors, and getting folks on that first step towards becoming fly fishers. I'm going to try to be correct and say fly fisher instead of fly fisherman. It seems like the right thing. So if I say fly fisherman, hit the big red zap button, and I'll go back to fly fisher or fly angler.
There you go. I'm a big proponent of the difference between angling and fishing, right? Like angling, one guy, one line; fishing, hauling a huge net behind an offshore trawler, or whatever.
That's the advanced class. It's offshore deep sea dredging. So we ran our first intro class in May, and then we ran our first advanced fly fishing class based out of the Big Eddy Campground on the west branch of the Penobscot last end of September it was. And that
just
was
like the Big Eddy on the west branch is like the hallowed halls of Maine fishing, right? I mean, if you could read hundreds of years of Maine fly fishing literature, it would be mentioned near the top of the list in most of those sort of top tens.
Oh, for sure. It's classic Maine big water fishing. A lot of Maine fly fishing is small, thin blue lines for native brook trout, or if you're down here in southern Maine, a lot of warm water fishing for warm water species, which is a ton of fun, tremendous fun on a fly. But you get up north, and when you can find those big, deep, fast rivers, then you start looking at the native landlocked salmon population and brook trout that get a little bigger than the brookies that live in the creeks and streams up north. So I agree, Big Eddy itself and the other large pools on the west branch, they're busy. It's a destination for people worldwide, but you come with us and we'll get you on water that no one else is fishing, and that's one of the reasons to go with the guide.
Yeah, so I just want to hear, kind of in your words, your personal fly fishing journey, how you got into it, and maybe you'll inspire a young person with it. Because I remember it was like 2005 or 2006. Do you remember that time, fall semester? We were on the Allagash, and it was near the end of the trip. We were out for like 2 weeks. We were camped at Five Finger Brook, and I think you were just getting into it then, and I think it was you, but somebody caught a 14-inch brookie that had a mouse in its belly. Remember the Scottish guy was teaching everybody how to spay cast, and he broke my saw and all that. You remember that trip?
Your memory is keen, Tim. I remember the Scottish fella and his son.
And the next morning, there was a young bull moose across the stream, and we were calling it, and it chased us for 2 miles, and everybody was really freaked out.
That got a little dicey.
That did get a little dicey, but I remember that was sort of like you were just getting into it then. Yeah,
I remember that. And actually, if our listeners go back to the podcast we recorded last summer, is that last summer we did the podcast?
I think it was Memorial Day when we were doing the class.
It was last May. I told a story on that about one of my first memories of fly fishing with you. I was probably in my mid-20s. You guys go back and listen to that story again. I won't tell the same story twice. I have fished my whole life, and got into fly fishing really as that obsessive, life-altering level when I lived in South Central Montana when I was in my late 20s. And that was just a time in my life. I had a lot of time, a little bit of disposable income. And I lived literally on the banks of some of the rivers that people save their whole life to go visit and fish once. And so I had the privilege to really, I was going to say cut my teeth, but it was more of cutting into my wallet and future pretty bad. I was out there every day, but
so this is a caution. Aimless. This is a cautionary tale for young people. Don't go down the rabbit hole.
It is, and that's kind of a great segue into what I wanted to share today, and what a lot of our introductory class is about is, fly fishing is just like a lot of activities in our culture where if you can cut to the bone, it's pretty simple. We're trying to fool an animal with a brain the size of a pencil eraser into eating a piece of food, really. And that's about as complicated as the sport needs to be. And that's if you trace fly fishing back to its origins, that's what we were doing. We were literally attaching a mayfly or some kind of aquatic insect life to a hook and dangling it out there, letting it blow in the breeze and letting it land on the water. And the fish would eat it, and then we'd eat the fish. This was before a lot of the catch and release came along. And so, and the nice thing about it is that fish haven't changed much in 500 years. They're still the same beings. They're still a few knocks below us on the intelligence scale, and they need to eat, and we're pretty good at catching them. And like I was saying, there's just like a lot of activities. We make a very simple activity very, very complicated with fly fishing.
Amen.
And unfortunately, I guess from my perspective, I see it as kind of a disservice to a lot of people, because it creates a lot of artificial barriers to getting into this activity, which brings ironically, should be so much peace and tranquility and serenity and joy and love into your life. But then we kind of have a lock on that door that it seems it's formidable for a lot of people to get into. And it was for myself.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think, like so many other activities in the modern world, it's a victim of the information age. Like, people think they can't go out and engage and participate in the sport without spending 7,000 hours watching YouTube videos about the perfect cast, the perfect gear, the perfect fly. And, I remember my very first fly rod. I grew up in New Hampshire and spin fishing, right? And I remember reading about fly fishing. I was probably like 11 years old, reading about fly fishing. And I was like, this sounds so cool. So I remember I hopped on my bike and rode to town, and I bought a fly rod for like $11. An old, I think it must have been an Eagle Claw, and it was probably fiberglass, and I probably still have it in the back of a shed somewhere. But like, that's sort of the, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's sort of that youthful exuberance and enthusiasm, right? Is sort of what you're going for on the classes. Get people to basically give them permission to not have to watch 700 hours of video and study books about aquatic entomology for 60 hours, and just get out on the water and have fun.
Yeah, no, I'm still kind of like the mental image of little boy Tim riding a bicycle to get a fishing rod. That's going to stick in my head for a while.
Bikes were, when I was a kid, bikes were everything. Like, it
wasn't a Razor scooter.
That's how you got to like all the little places, and we knew all the little trails around the town, and you knew every hole, every like spring hole that held trout, and it was awesome. So many days, and I look back now, and some of the places that we'd ride bikes to go fish when you're like 12 or 13, it must have been like a 3.5 hour bike ride to get there. And I don't even remember any of it. So it was like, you were so focused on getting there. And then, then it's getting dark and you want to get off the road before dark, because your mom will scream at you for being out too late and missing dinner and stuff. But yeah, it was a simpler age. Yeah, no, I love that. That's the perfect, it's the journey, not the destination kind of story. And I love that, because you're right. I mean, that's how a lot of us started. I remember I was fishing the cane rod with worm and bobber off my grandpa's dock, catching bluegills when I was little. And that was like pretty much the coolest thing. There was no, I'm going to hold up this bluegill for a Instagram picture, or I'm not going to, go home and obsess about, how much money I'm going to spend on gear this year, or all these
exotic destinations that are telling you that your backyard pond isn't good enough. So it was a simpler time. We can agree on that. I'm not going to pass judgment on good or bad, but it was simple. It was a simpler time.
Yeah, no, and it's all good. I enjoy, the modern thing, and I enjoy having access to so much information. And on a rainy or snowy or sleety winter's eve, how much fun to sit back with a well-written stories about fishing and things. It's enjoyable.
Oh, for sure. And I guess I say all that pretty tongue in cheek because you guys can't see it in podcast land, but behind me is more money in fly fishing gear than I would feel comfortable admitting to the general public. And so, on one hand, I appreciate the metaphysical side of life. And on the other hand, I have spent enough money and time on fly fishing to probably last a few lifetimes. So you got to be able to understand the both. That's like the journey of anyone. You start with nothing and you want everything, and then you get a little bit of stuff, and you're just so hungry for knowledge. And then you get the knowledge, and you realize that stuff doesn't matter. And it's kind of a continuum that we're all on. And I'm kind of in the middle, I guess. I still buy a lot of stuff. Amazon's busy delivering feathers and stuff to me still. So.
Well, so we talked about the classes. We're running them again this year. So we've got dates on the schedule for the introduction to fly fishing class and the advanced fly fishing class. But we're not here to try to sell you fly fishing classes. We're here to give you some information that you can use. So you just published a blog post on the Jack Mountain blog, which is essentially 10 things that you wish that you knew or that you had read before going down the fly fishing rabbit hole, right?
Oh, totally. And yeah, totally. And I say that because I look at myself when I was younger and how much time I spent researching and money I probably spent on things I didn't need. And there's a lot of value to that. And I acknowledge that in the blog post, that if you want to go down the rabbit hole, you'll come out, knowing a lot, but it's going to add a lot of time and money into your journey. And so I just kind of sat back and I was thinking of, what would I have loved for someone to sit down and chat with me about, when I was really, really hungry and getting into it. And so I started writing a list out, and I thought that'd make a really good blog post, because I bet there's people out there who are, just kind of opening the door and want to get into fly fishing, kind of like what you were talking about, Tim. You see the whole world, but you don't really know where to start. And so I started making a list, and that's what this blog post kind of turned into. And so the first thing I started with was, I didn't want to start with gear. It's too easy to look at any activity and start buying stuff. And then,
if you're insinuating that the most important part of everything isn't to look the part, honestly, I don't even understand where you're coming from anymore. I don't even know who you are. Like, this is the age of Instagram. If you don't look the part, you're nothing. You'll never be an influencer.
I'm just bitter. Clearly, this is just bitter angst coming out of me for not being a Instagram influencer at this later stage of my evolution. I'm jealous. Really, that's what it comes down to. No, it's funny though. Like, man, pick up any fly fishing magazine, and what are you looking at? You're looking at that person that's head to toe, brand new gear. They're probably $3 or $4 grand deep into that day, and you take a picture of me, and I probably look the same. So can't throw too many stones, but if you're insinuating that the fish don't really care what sort of specialty fly fishing shirt or pants you're wearing, like, I'm not buying it. I am not believing that. They can read. They can read labels.
Like, if you don't have the right logo on your gear, they're not going to bite at the terminal tackle that you're throwing out for them.
They're going to disrespect you all day long. All day long. No, it's a funny thing, and so in all of our introductory classes, that's something that I talk a lot about, because I'm a pro guide through a couple of fly fishing companies, and so I get discounts on gear that I support, because I think it's good stuff, but I always try to be pretty upfront and honest that I don't have an angle or a marketing aim from any company. I try to give people directions to get into the gear that I think is valuable and important, and that comes at a good value to their ability and their needs.
Don't get the worst. Don't get the absolute cheapest, but you don't need the most expensive either. Somewhere in the middle is okay. But we'll talk about gear in a minute.
Yeah.
I want to go through the 10 things point by point and have you kind of riff on what you mean. The number one, love. So what do you mean by that?
It means that when I look at you, Tim, I just want a big hug right now.
Yeah.
I'm missing the hugs. It's the love.
It's the pandemic.
It's pandemic love.
Yeah.
That's the sequel to Radar Love. Pandemic love. I got 2 kids. Dad jokes are rampant.
They are.
Yeah, totally, man. You give me anyone who's good at any activity, and they love it. They are there because they absolutely can't get enough of that activity, of what it does for them, what it gives for them, and that's what you see. I know that you mentioned you're watching the Olympics a lot lately, and all those Olympians, they don't need to be getting gold medals. They love it. I don't know who loves that skeleton thing, because that seems like pure terror, but without the love and without that connection to an activity, you're not gonna do it. And I've seen it as a guide. I've seen people who don't have the skill, but they just love being outdoors. They love being in the water, love being away from their phone, from their work, from their daily life. They love just feeling the sun on their face. They love catching a fish once in a while. They love, throwing a fly, but more than not, they just love being out there. And we saw that last May. A couple guys were just in happy land, being outdoors and being together. And to me, that's beautiful, because then, fishing is fickle. And when we get into fly fishing, you're choosing probably the hardest way to catch, if you're fishing for a trout, the hardest fish to catch. And so your return is going to be lower than if you just throw worms, with spinning gear. You're probably going to catch more fish. It's going to be easier. And so with fly fishing, if you get into it, you're already kind of stacking the odds against you. You're going to have some long days and some challenges and maybe a little bit of frustration. So if you don't love being out there, it's not going to stick. I've also seen people that, when they're learning, they don't seem to love being out there, and they get frustrated. And then, man, then you're really in a death spiral when you're fishing. If you're not loving it, it's not gonna do much for you, and you're gonna phase out of it. And that's why there's tennis, or I don't know, Minecraft, or golf. There's other activities to try out. Because if you don't have the love for even just being out in nature, it's going to be hard. Not to say you can't do it, and not to say you can't develop that relationship with nature, but it's important. And I wanted that to be the first thing that people think about when you're getting into any outdoor activity, and fly fishing especially, is, man, you gotta love being out there.
Absolutely, because it encapsulates
how could you not, really?
It encapsulates your motivation, and without the motivation, you're not going to stick with it. I agree.
Oh yeah, and man, it gives you an excuse just to be a little kid and play outside and wave a stick and throw bugs at fish and splash in the water and play in the mud and look at bugs and get dirty. And how could you not love that?
So number 2 of your top 10, rod, reel, and line. So here we are getting into gear. And again, I'll often poo-poo gear, but gear is important. Get the right stuff. I think when I poo-poo it, it's more about people's obsession with having the best stuff, that's a rabbit hole you'll never get out of. But having, it should be good enough. Don't ride your bike to town and get the $11 Eagle Claw fiberglass fly rod. So in a nutshell, what should people look for when they're looking? So you're new to fly fishing, what's the easiest way to get something that's useful?
Yeah, totally. I agree. So I had to do a little Amazon scoping out, and for $29.99, you can get a rod, reel, and line full kit, and that represents probably a very poor life choice. I merely mentioned it to throw out a low end barometer for price.
So
And
what would be the negative? So say I'm like, you know what, I got $30 to throw at this new hobby. What's the negative to doing the $29.99 package? Like where does it fall short? Like how would that not serve me well?
right. So kind of like I was saying, when you're fly fishing, you're already choosing a difficult way of catching a difficult fish. And you need your gear to perform to a certain level to achieve, let's say, a good cast of your line that's not going to scare the bejeepers out of a fish, because trout are very wary. And so if your rod is, got the flexibility of a pool cue, it's going to be really hard to cast. And if it's going to be really hard to cast when you're learning, you're going to have a harder time catching fish. And as a guide, I'm very aware of the fact that clients need a positive feedback. You need to feel that tug on your line. And all I'm afraid of with buying that really, really cheap gear, besides the fact it's going to break, and then you're going to get frustrated and probably end up just buying something new, in a couple of weeks.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I'm just afraid that it's going to negatively impact your enjoyment of being out there. You're just going to be frustrated. It's going to break. And, and honestly, at the end of the day, if $30 is your budget, then try it out. The worst that'll happen is it'll break and you'll be out $30. But what I always tell people is, if you're getting into the sport, if you can save $50, you could save a little longer and save $150. And if you get into the $150 to $175 range from a reputable outdoor company that makes fly fishing gear made by fly fishermen for, I'm saying it, fly fishers, fly fishermen. All right, we're just gonna roll with it. You're buying gear that's made for fly fishermen, and it's going to function properly. It's going to cast a line well, which is going to mean you're going to have more success in your learning. You're going to catch more fish. And also it's going to come with a warranty. And fly fishing gear can be delicate. It can break. We saw that last May in the intro course. And so when you're buying from a reputable fly fishing company, you're going to get a warranty that's going to cover the breaks that are, it's going to happen. I've broken many rods over the years. It just happens. And so getting in, I don't think you need to spend more than $200. Between $150 and $175, you can get a complete kit. And that complete kit will come with a rod and a reel and a line. It'll come with everything just about to get out of the water. And that's a great step to take if you're starting from step one, just to cover all of your bases in one purchase. And that's my recommendation for people who are without any gear at home.
Okay, so would you recommend people buy the package then, or assemble the package themselves? Meaning, like, just about everywhere you look, you can get the package deal, rod, reel, line, or do you recommend people buying it separate?
It depends on what kind of person you are. If you just want to be one and done and not spend too much time and money and effort on getting your rod, reel, and line, get a package. It's going to work. It's going to get you on the water. You're done. You don't have to think about it anymore. If you happen to live somewhere where there's a really good fly shop, or if you really want to go down the rabbit hole and do your legwork online, you can buy the components separate. You can buy your rod, reel, and your fly line separate, which maybe in the long run is good because you're going to get that knowledge, but it's going to take you longer and you're going to spend a little bit more money buying the pieces separate.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So in a nutshell, if you want to learn how to process wood with an axe, get a good axe, or good enough that it'll hold an edge and be sharp. Don't try to learn it with a dull axe. Don't try to carve wood with a super crappy dull knife. Don't try to learn how to fly fish with the world's worst rod that's going to break or not flex. It doesn't have to be the best, but it's got to be good enough. Would you say that's an accurate analogy?
That's far more accurate and succinct than what I just spent the last 10 minutes trying to say.
Yeah.
So I'll turn it
over here.
Man, that was pretty fly, man. Yes, totally agree.
Pretty fly. Moving on to our next component, number 3,
Wasn't
flies.
that nice?
Yeah.
Man.
See how I did that?
I didn't even plan it. I'm just gonna throw it out there. That was not in the books. When you're looking at fly fishing, the definition of fly fishing, some people will say, well, what's your terminal tackle? What's on the end of your line? And in this case, we in the fly fishing world say it's your fly. To make it really simple, it doesn't mean it's your common house fly. Fly just refers to whatever form of aquatic insect or little aquatic creatures on the end of your fly line. It could be any number of things. And this is another area of the fly fishing world that has gotten wildly complex for a good reason, because I tie flies myself because I love the art of it. I love the experimenting. I love the connection with the understanding of what bug or little species you're trying to mimic with this collection of fur and feathers at home. But for the beginner, if you go into a fly shop, we took a few guys from our semester program up to Alvin Terrio's fly shop in Patton. Highly recommend going there. It's rad. And one of their reactions to walking in was, this is like taking a hungry child to a candy store, because it was overwhelming with options, and it was wonderful.
It's probably a couple thousand square feet of just flies and fly tying material. Would you concur?
Oh, it's fantastic. And Alvin's the nicest guy that you can imagine talking to. It's a wonderful, locally owned store. So I'd definitely give Alvin a try if you're in the North Main Woods.
Right on Route 11 in northern Maine, just south of Patton.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Fantastic store. But it can be overwhelming. So if you go into a fly shop, you're going to see 500 different patterns of fly. And that, like I said, covers a lot of different species, but it's very overwhelming. But if we rewind the tape 20 minutes after or before all my rambling here, I said that fish are simple. They have a small brain and they like to eat. And what do they like to eat? Put a worm on a hook, fish is going to eat it. That's about as simple as fishing needs to be. Trout are a little more picky at times, but most fly fishing can be accomplished with maybe a half a dozen pieces of tackle on the end of your line. And so what I wrote in the blog is there's three kind of styles of fly to be aware of. There's a fly that floats on the surface. There's a fly that sinks and you fish it below the surface of the water. And then there are flies that imitate bigger species like crayfish, fish, and leeches. And so I recommend getting two kinds of the fly that float on top. I'm going to try to stay pretty simple with my wording here. Get two flies that float on top of the water.
Called a dry fly.
A dry fly.
Yeah.
And if we want the names, if you want to get an Adams dry fly and an elk hair cats, those are two examples of a dry fly that will work anywhere in the world. A lot of species of fish, whether you're fishing for bluegill or Atlantic salmon or trout, they'll all eat those bugs. And you can get those in a couple different sizes. You can look on the blog and find more details. I'd recommend two of the bugs called nymphs that we fish below the surface of the water. One would be a gold ribs hare's ear, hare is a rabbit, and the other is a pheasant tail. Again, and those will imitate a lot of the immature versions of that bug that we fish as dry flies. It's like the baby version of the adult fly. And then one of the most recognized and fished patterns that imitate like a bait fish or a crayfish or a leech would be called a woolly bugger. And if you get those in a couple different colors, those 5 flies are going to cover, they could cover 90% of your fishing need in the state of Maine for brook trout and salmon. So that right there, keep it simple. A quick story, when I was getting into this, I was in Montana, which is kind of a bad place to get into fly fishing on a very basic level because the fly shops are very big and full and very up to date out there. And I remember making list after list after list. I just scoured every book I could find. And I was looking for those correlations. What does one author say that agrees with another author that agrees with another author as far as what flies do I need? And I'm pretty sure I spent like $600 that first day on flies in a fly shop. And ironically, I still have a third of them that I never even used. So start simple and gain complexity as your knowledge grows.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, our next big picture topic, odds and ends. What are some odds and ends that people should be aware of?
Dynamite.
Yes.
WD-40 and Velveeta cheese.
Ooh.
That was a big illegal one back in Wisconsin. Velveeta covered in WD-40. It would crush it with the fish. Highly illegal though.
Really? I've never heard that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It was legal in Wisconsin because they didn't want to defile the America's Dairyland with Velveeta.
Well, that was probably you'd think that would be something we would support, just like the wanton waste and disregard for Velveeta as a cheese-like product. Now feed it to the fish. It was like a good wasted WD-40 or something.
There you go.
Yeah, so odds and ends, so we've got our rod, we got our reel, we got our fly line, we got our flies. Kind of the only missing component to that is what we call a leader. And a leader, if you can picture what regular fishing line looks like, it's thin and it's clear. And so a leader is going to be a long piece of thin, clear monofilament fishing line. And luckily these days you can buy it in a little pack. It comes with a loop on the end, so it's really easy to connect to your fly line. And it's what you would tie your fly to. And so if you're shopping, you're going to want to pick up some leaders. Again, super easy to find. It's not a very complex piece of equipment to locate. Every fly shop has leaders.
And any sporting goods shop like Walmart, most gas stations in rural, if there's people fish there, most gas stations will have them, at least in the Masardis metropolitan area, most of the shops have them.
MMA.
Yeah.
Yep. And so a leader, I should probably pin this whole conversation. The one piece of information I didn't mention yet was fly fishing rods, reels, and fly lines are all measured by what we call a weight. I'm not going to tell you what that means, but when you're starting out fly fishing, if you were going to buy one size fly rod, you would want a 9-foot long, this is in the blog too, you want a 9-foot long fly rod in a 5 weight. Don't ask me what that means. You don't even need to know what it means. But if you're shopping, you want a 9-foot long rod in a 5 weight. And that means you can.
Well, let me just the weights, the lower the weight, like if it's a 2 weight, that means it's super heavy duty for like catching giant fish. No, that means it's super light duty for catching tiny fish. And if it's a really high weight, if it's like an 11 weight, that means it's for like big, huge saltwater fish. So the higher the number of the weight, the bigger the fish you would catch it with.
Yeah, I mean, technically the higher the weight is in correlation with the weight of your fly line. Right. And then the weight of the fly line is in relation to the fly you're casting, not necessarily the fish. So there is a loose connection between rod weight and fish size, but it's more of rod weight to fly size. So if you're casting, like you said, a really, really heavy rod, typically that means you're casting two bigger fish, and that means a bigger fly. So it's all loosely related, but it's definitely true. The size of the fish, the size of the fly will determine what size, weight, rod, and line you need. And so, yeah, you're right.
The idea being that if you went out fishing with that guy Quint from that Jaws documentary where they caught the giant shark, and you used one of his giant shark rods to try to catch like a 6-inch brook trout, it wouldn't probably be the most fun you've ever had.
If he was there, it'd be fun. Well, right. No, actually, if he was there, you'd probably get eaten. But yeah, you're right. You're right. And so, I mean, people fish for 2 weight with a 2-weight rod, which is a really thin, noodly rod that even a large bluegill would give you trouble with. So anyway, there's a lot to know about weights and lines and rod lengths. You can get a 7-foot rod, you can get a 14-foot rod.
So just can you recap what should they get now that you were like, I'm not going to say that because I don't want to confuse people, and I went off the deep end with talking about Jaws and stuff. What do they want again?
It all goes back to Jaws. The beginner, to cover all your bases, you can go from bluegill up until small schoolie striped bass, large landlocked salmon, the 9-foot long 5-weight rod and reel and line.
Perfect.
That's going to cover all your bases.
All right. So moving on, number 5 is technique. What would you like people to know about technique?
Yeah. Oh wait, I did pin that last out. I'll get the technique. A couple other odds and ends.
Oh,
you want a small bag. You need a small bag to carry all this fun new stuff you're going to get. I started with a small, I think it was like a camera bag. It was tiny, the size of most iPhones now probably. You just want something to put your extra flies in, maybe a couple extra leaders, some bobbers if you're using your split shot. You want a little bag to carry everything, something that's not going to get in the way. And then there's a bunch of little odds and ends like bobbers and split shot and things to make our flies float, which you don't need to worry about as a beginner, but it's okay to have on your radar. And then the other piece of equipment to have on your radar is waders and boots. Now, a lot of the fish we fish for with the fly rod are cold water fish. And cold water fish love water that's like 65, 70 degrees, which sounds warm. Probably sounds like your ambient air temperature in Texas right now. But if you stand in 65, 70-degree water for more than 10 minutes, your bones are going to hurt. It's cold. It makes your days tough. And so most people I'm sure started with not perfect boots and waders. I started with knee-high lacrosse rubber boots that they work. They're fine until you're in water that's an inch taller than your knee. And then your boots are full of water. If you're tough, you can start with just tennis shoes and blue jeans if you want. But something to keep in the back of your head is a waterproof wader that's going to keep your legs warm. And then a boot that's made for fly fishing that maybe has a sole on it that's going to be a little stickier on some of the slippery rocks. So anyway, not to get too far into the odds and ends, but those are things that, like when you're making your Santa's list for next Christmas, those are things to ask Santa Claus for.
Okay. Yeah. Moving on to technique, number 5. This is a big one.
Moving on. Oh, wait, I want to go back on the odds and ends and gear because that's fun and technique is scary. No, I'm just kidding. So technique. I wish sitting here in my house, looking at this beautiful sunny day outside, that I could sit here and in 5 minutes tell you how to fly fish, because that would be, I would actually probably be rich because I would be able to sell the Tony Little version of, what did Tony Little sell? Was he a
exercise
dehydrator?
equipment?
Exercise equipment. That's right. I couldn't remember. He had a long ponytail, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I wish I could sell you that 5-minute abs version of fly fishing, and then Tim would try to sell me the 4-minute abs, and I'd be broke. Tim would have all my sweet ab money. I wish I could do that, but I can't. The long game of any activity should be a lifetime of study. And any activity that you can learn in 2 days or an afternoon, it's probably going to get boring after a while because you're going to max out on what you can do and where you can grow and what you can learn. Luckily with fly fishing, there is nothing that you're going to learn today or maybe in the next 5 years where you're going to be like, I'm done. I know it all. That day just doesn't exist, especially when there's fish and bugs and weather and water and gear all to go down the wormhole and rabbit hole on. So what I will tell you though is what I wish someone would have told me when I was just starting out, is that technique matters, just like in golf. You can be that jackalope that Happy Gilmore is a ball off the tee and runs and swings like a wild man, and maybe every once in a while you connect and hit the ball 400 yards, and most times you miss and you look like a jackalope on the course. And so you look at most fly fisher people, and myself included, and there's glitches in our form and our casting and our knot tying and our fly selection, and hopefully our determination overcomes those shortcomings. But you can solve a lot of that by doing yourself a favor and taking a lesson. Take a lesson from someone who knows how to cast. Take a lesson from someone who can get you on the water and get you on the right path from day one. And maybe you'll forego years and years of trying to undo bad technique and bad form and bad decisions, where if you just start off on the right path, the right first step of that journey, then you're going to save a lot of years of learning and trial and error like I did. And
so technique is really why we started running fly fishing courses, right? Because most of the stuff about gear, granted, there's 8 million differing opinions, but you can get a lot of that from books. You can, a lot of sort of the fact-based knowledge about what's this bug called, what is this piece of gear called, how does it work? A lot of that is great, but essentially with casting, with fishing, you're learning a skill. And from an instructional design perspective, it's really hard to learn a skill remotely. Like you can learn information remotely, but as far as learning a skill, for example, how far back do you come on your back cast? How do you know if you've gone too far? All those things. What is there's 8,000 knots that I could potentially learn. What's the shortest, what are the fewest I need to learn and how do I tie them? So, being in the presence of a skilled instructor or just someone with more experience than you is often the shortest route to competency. Would you agree?
Oh, without a doubt. But most of what I've learned in life, in just about everything, but definitely fly fishing, I learned by fishing with other really talented fly fishermen in Maine and Montana and Wisconsin. and fishing with those friends of mine, just watching their form and being like, hey, why did you tie that fly on right here? Or what cast would you use to reach this fish in a really kind of tight spot? And those are the conversations that you can have with people that really accelerate your learning. And I totally agree. You could surf the web and read books and learn about high modulus graphite rods, the benefits of graphite versus boron versus bamboo. And you can learn that because that's pretty cut and dry scientific information.
Because it's information, it's not a skill.
Right.
Like you can't learn a skill that way.
Right. And so you're right. That was, years and years of watching people struggle casting as a guide or out with friends. And a lot of the conversations we had, Tim, really led to us wanting to put together a comprehensive class where we cut out a lot of the information that you can learn on your own. And we hammer for those 3 days that skill, that technique, that kind of that meta knowledge of the activity, of those things that you could watch YouTube videos for the next 30 years and you're not going to get that feedback tailored to what you're doing and tailored to your experience. And we had a fella last May who had some shoulder surgery, and I didn't know about it. And I was watching him cast, and I was thinking, man, that arm has got to get up higher. You're sagging with your casting arm, and it's affecting your casting. And so I was trying to help him get into better position, and it turned out like he's like, oh no, I've had that shoulder operated on X amount of times. And I'm like, oh, that helps me now, because now I can help you tweak your form and get a better cast, where he could have watched YouTube videos the rest of his life and he wouldn't have had someone there giving him that corrective feedback based on his unique physiology. And so there's so many reasons to work with a guide, and there's so many reasons to come and join us for our intro to fly fishing class in May. It's going to accelerate your learning. It's going to give you that 2 or 3 year advantage to other people, and it's going to get you going right away. Everyone in the class last May, I got feedback from that they were catching trout, if not that next week, within 2 weeks of that program, and not easy places. A couple were catching brook trout in Baxter State Park, like literally that next weekend. The other couple were catching fish up by the Forks, like 2 weeks later. Catching good rainbows, good brook trout.
Nice.
And
honestly, and if you're going out fishing and you're catching fish, you're having more fun. Like, yeah. Let's call it what it is. Like, it's more fun to go out and catch fish than it is to go out and get skunked. So
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I listen to other fly fishing podcasts, and routinely they'll get people calling in being like, yeah, I've been really getting into fly fishing this summer, and so far I'm 3 months in, I haven't caught my first fish yet, but I'm still doing it. And the hosts are like, well, it takes a while. It may take that 6 months. It could be your first year of fishing that you don't catch a fish, but I guarantee if you take a good class, if you work with a guide, you won't have that fishless summer, which bottom line, it sucks. I mean, we've all been there, we've all done it, but it doesn't mean you have to go through that. And so, join us up in Jack Mountain this May, and your learning curve will accelerate. You'll catch fish.
We're getting pretty long here, so I think maybe we'll finish this one up and maybe revisit it at a later date for numbers 6 through 10. But just in a nutshell, the dates are May 27th to May 29th. All the information's on the website. How big is the group that you have for the class?
Yeah.
What's the max size?
Max Powers. So in May, our max size had to be one Simpsons reference in this last hour of rambling here.
Yeah.
In May, our max size is 6. We keep all of our fly fishing classes low in size, because I firmly believe that I would rather have less revenue and give you all a way better experience. And so our introductory class is limited to 6, and I believe we're half full at the moment.
Yep, 3 spots remain.
Yep, 3 spots left in May. And then our classes in September are our advanced classes. And I believe those are limited to 3 or 4. I could be wrong, but that's a smaller class.
Sounds right.
Yeah, because that's all fishing in the field, remote camping, where we're fishing all day long up on the West Branch. And so that class is even smaller.
Why
small
September
class
on the
size.
West Branch? Tease this one out a little
Oh
bit.
man, September on the West Branch.
What's happening on the West Branch in September?
What
Fish-wise.
isn't happening? What's not happening up there? No, West Branch is, like we were talking about earlier, is epic. And September is the time when we're getting all of our spawning fish running up in the West Branch. And so they're getting the brookies and the salmon are getting big. They're getting colorful. They're getting aggressive. They're chasing down smaller fish out of aggression and out of territorialism. And so the fishing, it can be wild. And pin that. And the weather's perfect. There's no bugs. The leaves are changing, so it's gorgeous. There's views of Katahdin. It's cool nights. It's warm days, and there's less people. For whatever reason, North Maine woods get quiet in September when it's ironically probably the best time to be there. Last year we were catching 16 to 20-inch salmon on nymphs, on streamers, and it was a beautiful couple days. And
Not
so,
just that, but
looking
didn't
forward.
you tell me that you also caught a couple of very small perch?
The white perch. So yeah, that was one of those moments as a guide when I kind of had to laugh at myself. So sometimes just catching a fish is fun. And I'm never going to outgrow that. I'm never going to be too good for myself to not have fun catching just about anything. And so we were on a different eddy, which I'm not going to name. And my two clients were fishing the meat of the run. And just to kind of give them a break from my instruction and my constant tinkering with their form and their flies, I just kind of walked to the head of the pool, and the water was pretty low last fall. So there's a big kind of circulating non-trout salmon looking pool. And I was throwing a woolly bugger up there because I always want to stay a step ahead of my clients and try new patterns out to see if I can keep them in the fish. And like literally on my first 10 casts, I pulled in these like 12-inch white perch out of the West Branch. And I was giggling, I was laughing, and my clients were giving me a really hard time that this mastermind guy could only catch a white perch. And so it became like this running joke all weekend. And I'm happy to be at the end of a joke if it means my clients are laughing and having a good time. And honestly, I was having a good time. I mean, I wasn't fishing the good water. I was just keeping myself busy and catching these perch. And at the end of the day, Tim, that's the beauty of it. Like, it's just, you're out there, it's gorgeous. The whole canyon up there is beautiful, and a tug on the line is a tug on the line. And for me, it never gets old. I don't care if it's a carp or an Atlantic salmon or a perch. It's all good.
Nice. Yeah, agreed. Good day fishing is a bad day fishing is better than a good day doing most other things.
Except talking with you. This is great.
Yeah, that's why I spend a lot of my days like in front of the mirror talking to myself, trying just to optimize or something.
Optimization mode. You all can't see it. There's nothing but mirrors surrounding Tim's background right now.
There you go.
I can see like infinite of you.
Well, we've been rambling for quite a while. Let's wrap this one up. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Let's do it again maybe soon and get through numbers 6 through 10. And Paul Sveum, registered master main guide. And again, there's only 3 spots left in that May intro to fly fishing 3-day course. So you can jump on the website. There'll be a link in the show notes. And thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. I feel like I should introduce you as a master main guide as well. It's not a service to yourself just to be giving us all the credit. But thanks, Tim, for having me on. It's always great to chat. I love talking about fly fishing and doing anything outdoors. And I encourage you all, if you're at step 1, join us in May. You're not going to regret it. It's a wonderful time.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Let's talk again soon.
Sounds good. We'll see ya.
See ya.
You have been listening to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast. For more information on our professional wilderness guide training programs that are college accredited and GI Bill approved, visit us on the web at jackmtn.com.